Okay, so here we are in HitFilm Express 4, and you'll see I've got three different sequences here made up of the same material that you guys had access to. But I just want to start off by saying that I was so impressed by what you guys uploaded so far to the Google Plus community. You've really made my job really easy in that I think I've seen the full spectrum of different styles of video that you can use or make with the footage that I provided. I'm really impressed, and it seems like you guys have got a real good uh, grip of the software and everything. So here I just want to go over some of the issues that I saw crop up with people's videos, but I also just want to present three different styles of video or three different lengths, durations of sequences that you can make with this set of video clips. So let's take a look at the first clip here. Let's zoom in and play through.
This is Coal Oil Point Reserve. I come here in April and May to look at snowy plovers. This beach is great habitat for snowy plovers. The reason is, if you look here, there's all these small dunes and a lot of small pebbles. And snowy plovers use these things to protect themselves when it gets really windy, and also to protect themselves from predators. So these plovers, they make their nests right here on the beach. Those nests are called scrapes, by the way. So one of the reasons that this beach is so great for plovers is what they like to eat is also here. What they like to eat is something called a sandfly. And those sandflies, what they like to eat is back here, all of this washed up kelp, which washed up from on shore. So to keep the plovers here, it's really important to keep the kelp here, to not remove that kelp.
Okay, so let's jump straight into the visual narrative part. And if we zoom in to this first shot, you can see what I did was I just used that shot of Jai walking to the preserve, simple enough. And then we cut to the shot of Jai walking on the beach, and I think that makes sense, it's pretty intuitive. But the next cut I don't think is quite so simple. If we were to cut from Jai just walking on the beach straight to him looking for snowy plovers, in one shot he's walking and then the next he's stopped looking for things, and that can be quite jarring. So what I did with this clip was that I let it run to the end and I included the pan that was at the end there, so it kind of establishes the location, and we also leave Jai behind as we pan to the right, and I think it makes the cut a lot more smooth because we can assume that maybe he stopped walking and started looking for plovers while we pan to the right. So yeah, it just made that cut work a little bit easier. The next cut here, we've got the luxury of having the same action filmed from two different angles. I got Jai to repeat the same action, and what this means is, well, it means two things. It means that we can use a very traditional form of editing, which is cutting on the action. So I cut the two clips to the point at which his binoculars were a very similar distance to his eyes, and it just makes the clip it makes the cut run a lot more smoothly. It makes the edit feel a lot more natural as well, and that's called cutting on the action. It also serves a secondary purpose in that it actually compresses time quite a lot. It perhaps took a few more seconds for Jai to raise his binoculars to his eyes and then lower them again and then add the notes to his notebook in here. But by using one shot and then cutting back to the first, we can actually compress time to a lot shorter amount of time than if we'd just shown one clip in its entirety without cutting to several. And that's especially true when we cut to the B-roll next. We get this perspective through his binoculars, and we introduce the main subject of the video, the snowy plover, in quite a dramatic close-up. And we're only between 10 and 15 seconds in here, and we've already introduced the main subject of the video. And I'd say for online that is still too long. You want to introduce the main subject of your video in the first few seconds, but you know, it's not bad for our first attempt. So we cut to the B-roll, we get to see what he's looking at through his binoculars, and then we cut back to Jai. And this is where we really begin to compress the time that that it really took for Jai to lower his binoculars, because here we've cut out a load of time that's happened in between these two halves of the number 11 clip. Jai actually looked through his binoculars for a lot longer than the duration of this B-roll, but because we've cut this clip in two, we can cut it to just a few fractions of a second before he lowers his binoculars, and then we tilt down to see him write in his notebook. And I didn't actually take the clip to the point where we see him writing. I think the fact that he's got a pen in his hand implies that he's going to make some notes and a notebook. So then I just cut straight to the A-roll, or the piece to camera. But let's just backtrack a little bit here and let's talk about the audio before we move on. Now, I know in the first tutorial I picked two clips as an example and I showed you how to mix the audio from them, but you'll notice here with these walking on the beach shots and the bird watching shots, I've just removed the audio completely. I unlinked and just deleted the audio track, and what I put in their place was the audio from this sustained 2-minute track of the ocean. Now, I know a lot of you chose to use this shot in your stories. It's a very nice shot. The shots of the ocean lapping at the shore there, they evoke a lot of positive emotions in people, and it's a very nice shot to put in an intro for example. But for a science video and for a video where you're trying to influence a change of thinking or a change in action of your audience, it perhaps isn't the most necessary shot to drive the story of your video. And I really shot this video for the audio track. I just let it run for maybe 2 minutes, and I even named it AU beforehand to give me a little clue that this was just for the audio. And the visual part of it just ended up being a byproduct of that purpose. So what I did was I brought that onto the timeline. I unlinked the audio, and instead of deleting the audio, I actually deleted the video part. I deleted the visual section. And it's got some bird song at the beginning, which is quite relevant for when he's up on the bluffs before he goes down onto the beach. So I kept the volume of the track at default there. And then as we begin to cut down onto the beach, I start ramping down the volume. And that's because when we could make this cut, we're further from Jai and we're further from the ocean. So it makes sense that the background noise should sound a little bit further away, and I did that by reducing the volume of the track for this duration of the clip. Now, one thing I did notice about HitFilm Express that I just want to pull up right now, and I did notice in a couple of your videos that you uploaded to the Google Plus community, was that the audio was a bit distorted sometimes, and I think I figured out why. And when you add a keyframe to audio in HitFilm Express like this, I hold down Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, and you'll see that the audio automatically dips down here when I add that keyframe. If I just undo that with Command C or Control Z and then do it again, you can see the volume dip down. And I don't know why it's doing that, but a way to prevent it is first to go over to controls, and then with the audio track selected, you go over to properties, click on that little arrow. Now you can see the level that we've set it at, which is minus 11.2 dB. And if we go to the beginning of the clip, the default is 0. As a general rule, you never want to bring a clip above 0 unless you've recorded it really quiet or something. So we've ramped down. You can see the level here. If you watch the level as we scrub through, it starts dipping down and then it stays at 11, 10, and it's even reducing now. So this keyframe is actually lower than that one, which I actually wasn't aware about. So let's fix that. So let's go over here. It's minus 11.4.
Foil point resist.
Let's move. We can move one frame but at a time using the comma and period keys on the keyboard. So minus 11.4. So let's choose that keyframe, just make sure the playhead's on it. Let's zoom in a little bit more as well. And what we can do is just turn that back to minus 11.4. And that way we can make sure that this volume between keyframes 2 and 3 remain at 11.4, and now it starts to ramp upwards like that. So we've ramped down, and then as we get cut closer to Jai and closer to the ocean, I brought that level back up to not quite 0 as the default, but I've brought it up to minus 6. So I've kind of split the difference. And then as we get into Jai's piece to camera, which is this audio clip here, I'm starting to reduce the volume of the waves because Jai recorded his piece to camera on location. We've got waves in the background, and so we don't need 2 sets. So I've just brought that down, not all the way to infinity, but I have reduced it to almost unnoticeable level. Okay, so that's how I dealt with the audio stuff. The next thing to think about is Jai's piece to camera, and as a lot of you noticed, I included a lot of illustrative B-roll, and you all used it very effectively to emphasize what Jai's talking about during his piece to camera. First of all, I cut to this windy shot. You see the wind blowing through the feathers of the plover and the sand blowing in the foreground and background. It's very illustrative, and Jai immediately talks about how the pebbles also help them hide from predators. So I didn't even bother cutting back to the A-roll here. There wasn't enough time to do so. If you cut back to the A-roll, you've got to leave it to breathe. You've got to leave it to cut back to the A-roll for a long enough time before you cut back to B-roll. Otherwise, it doesn't really feel very natural. So in this instance, I felt it was best just to cut to another B-roll shot, and it seems to work perfectly fine. Then after the shot of the raptor, I then cut back to Jai, and this is where he refers back to the beach behind him. And this is all to do with the style that Jai chose to deliver his piece to camera. It was all referencing where he was at that time. And I would say it is nice to have your piece to camera or your narration set in a place that's relevant to what you're talking about. I guess the style in which Jai chose to deliver this piece to camera meant that it makes most sense for me to see him on screen because he's talking about on this beach, or if you look here, and things like that. So it makes sense to have him as like a presenter kind of character on screen. So he talks about the plovers nesting on the beach, so we then cut to the B-roll of the female incubating the eggs after he's gestured towards the sand, and then we cut back to Jai on the beach again. And now he's going to talk about what they eat. So I use the B-roll of the snowy plover feeding, and some of you, I noticed that you picked up on a mistake that Jai made in his piece to camera. He repeats the word sandfly, or he says sandfly and then corrects it to sandflies, when actually I think sandfly works best because he says snowy plovers eat a thing called a sandfly, and then he says sandflies. So I cut off the sandflies at the end, and what that meant was on the A-roll, the shot of him talking on the beach, there's now a cut, there's now a jump in time where I've removed some material here. And I've covered that up with a bit of B-roll. So when we play through that cut, you don't notice because we cut from one B-roll shot to another. And we can actually, the cut in the B-roll doesn't need to match that cut. We can move it wherever we want. And in fact, if we just delete that B-roll altogether, we can actually watch the jump cut happen.
Sandfly. And
so because we've got the same clip on either side of that cut, there's like a jump in time and space where Jai seems to jump within the frame, and it's extremely unnatural. It's not how we experience everyday life, talking to people or just going about our daily lives. And unless that's like an intentional stylistic thing, it can really disengage your viewer. It reminds them that they're watching a video, and it distracts them from your main message of your video. So let's put that B-roll back. We've got the B-roll covering up that mistake in the A-roll, and then after we've illustrated what the snowy plovers feed on, we can cut back to Jai, and as we finish up the sequence, he has his call to action, and he references again the kelp behind him and the importance of not removing it. And as for the audio, I've just let that fade out as Jai finishes his piece to camera. I make sure that first keyframe occurs after he's finished speaking, otherwise his actual words start to fade to zero as well. Now I noticed a lot of you put on like an ending as in it was a completely encapsulated video. It's great that you're already thinking about that. I guess I presented this exercise as more of a sequence that would appear within a larger video, but it doesn't really matter. All you guys who participated seem to get the point and at least got started with the software, so I'm just really happy with that. Now this first sequence that I've just shown you, I think it's a really good example of visual storytelling. It's an easy, methodical sequence to follow as we watch Jai go bird watching, etc. But to be honest with you, it's a little bit luxurious. If we were making a video for real life, for your science projects, for your lab, if you wanted to upload this to your website, the chances are that this introduction with no talking is probably a little bit drawn out, even though it's only 15 seconds long before Jai starts talking. Your audience could well possibly lose interest. So in the next two sequences, I'm going to show you how I can compact this sequence even more, get rid of unnecessary material, and we can really start thinking about how to make this sequence more peppy and kind of more engaging right from the get-go. So I'm going to skip on ahead to the next sequence here using the page down key, and that lets me move to the next edit or the next clip every time I press it, and the page up key moves closer to the beginning of the timeline. And this works for video clips, audio clips, whatever's next on the timeline. Pressing either page up or page down will move to the next clip on the timeline. So here we are on the second sequence that I made, and the very first thing I did was I got rid of that opening shot of Jai entering the preserve. I thought it was a little bit unnecessary, and I overexposed the sign where it said Coal Point Preserve, Sands Beach, that kind of thing. So I just got rid of that entirely, and I moved this little bit of audio here where he says in April and May I like to go to my local wildlife preserve and watch snowy plovers. It cuts a few seconds off, and then the second change I made was during the bird watching sequence. I still have the pan at the end of here. I cut to Jai, he lifts up his binoculars, and then we cut to the snowy plover. But the difference between this sequence and the last one is that while we see the snowy plover, I introduced the audio from Jai's piece to camera, and then from here on out the audio and the visual story is the same as the previous one. I just cut a few seconds off here, and now if we see when the sequence starts, 1:27, and we see the plover at 1:37, we see the snowy plover 10 seconds in, which is just shaved a few seconds off, which might not seem like a lot, but we've introduced our main subject that much closer to the beginning of the sequence. And considering that our video is so short to begin with, and the attention span of our audience is so short online, it really matters to kind of lead with some good footage and lead with the really, the purpose or the main subject of your video. Okay, so then the rest of this video plays out the same as the previous one. Let's see the third version and how I really managed to reduce the time needed to play through the sequence. So let's zoom on ahead with page down, and here we are on the third sequence in the timeline. And as you see, I got rid of the walking to the beach. I got rid of the bird watching sequence as well, and I just started with the Jai walking on the beach. And you'll see here I start immediately with the audio from Jai's piece to camera. I've still got that atmospheric wild track here down here, but I'm immediately ramping that down as I bring up the volume of Jai's piece to camera. And he's walking on the beach, pan to the right, and as he mentions snowy plovers in the A-roll or his piece to camera, we see it. So it's a little bit more abstract. It's no longer like we're getting a view through Jai's binoculars, but we get to the point a lot quicker. As he says snowy plover, we see one, we understand that that's what he's talking about, and we are 2:39 at the beginning and 2:44. So we introduce our main character or our main subject 5 seconds in, which is a huge improvement from that first version. And then from the here on out, the rest of the sequence plays the same. And the main reason why it plays the same is that while you can edit out mistakes in the A-roll like we showed here and cover it with B-roll, other than that, it's actually very difficult or a lot more complex to alter the duration of a piece to camera, and that's why your plan for your video matters so much in how and what you're going to say when you deliver the informational part of your video. And you'll also notice that I've added some text here, and I've added the Jai's name and perhaps his affiliation or what he's interested in here, and that aids in giving more information to your audience without having to explain it. So again, you've got this whole visual channel on a video in order to transmit information to your audience. And by cutting this sequence so short in this third version, we've actually missed out the opportunity to use that piece of audio where he says, in April and May, I like to visit Cullow Point Preserve to look at snowy plovers. So we can put some of that information back visually, like we've put this information in by writing it on the screen. And we can write something on this opening shot. So let's see how to do that in HitFilm Express. Let's click on the clip we want to write on, and you want to press on Make Composite Shot. And keep the default settings, press OK, and you'll see here in your timeline it's opened a new tab and it's made a composite shot out of that clip. You can always go back to your main timeline under editor, but when we are on here we are just editing the contents of this clip, and it's a really powerful tool of HitFilm for Express, which isn't available in many other free editing software, including iMovie. Actually, this is an advantage of HitFilm for Express. But for this basic task, we're just going to do something very basic. So once we're in that composite shot of 0009, we are going to add a new layer, text. The default is 400 by 400. I've changed mine to 600 by 400, but you can change that later if you make a mistake or you want to enlarge it later, and that gives you a little text box. So then in here, I can double click, and that selects the text editing tool here, and what we're going to do is just write point preserve, and then we're going to say UC Santa Barbara maybe we'll write Goleta as well, and then once we've got that there, we can change the position of that text on the screen by moving it to a point in the screen that's not very busy. So it doesn't really work very well down here because we've got a lot going on visually in the image. I'd put it on the clearer sand down here or up in the sky. And now we've added the information that we used to hear audibly. We can now read that information on the screen. We can go a step further by having that information fade in and out by selecting the text, clicking on the down arrow, press transform, and now click on this circle next to opacity, and that creates a keyframe. If we reduce the opacity down to 0, you can see it disappears. Move the playhead just a few frames, and now bring the opacity back to 100. And now between those two keyframes, the text fades in as we play forward. Now we want that text to stay on the screen for a good amount of time, and then we want it to fade out. Now if I was to reduce the opacity to 0 here, what that would mean was between keyframes between keyframes 2 and 3, it would slowly fade away. We don't want that to happen. So let's undo that keyframe. And what we want to do is add another 100%. So we're telling it between keyframes 2 and 3, we want to stay at 100. So we're going to add another keyframe at that level by pressing this circle here. Now we'll move the playhead forward a few frames and reduce it to 0. And now it fades out between those two keyframes 3 and 4 and stays at 100 between keyframes 2 and 3. So now let's go back to the editor and see how it looks.
This beach is great habitat.
Now it's a funny thing with HitFilm Express, when you make a composite shot, even if you've unlinked the audio from the clip and deleted it, once you make the composite shot, it seems to put the audio back on here. And the way you can get rid of that is just by right-clicking, going up to options and then pressing mute. And that just gets rid of the audio that used to be associated with it. And any audio that plays under now the composite on your main editor timeline should just be one single track.
This beach is great habitat.
And it's not quite so overbearing. So now we've added information that we used to hear, we can now read it on screen. Our whole sequence is under a minute, I think, so this is 2:38, and then by the end we are at 3:32. So yeah, we're just under a minute here to get across all that information, and I don't think we've lost much by losing those bird watching shots or the walking onto the preserve shots either. I think those shots were great for you guys to practice, but when you come to plan your own videos, you really have to think about how do you get your main message across quickly, how do you get the subject or the best visual material that you have available onto the screen in the most timely manner. And sometimes these kind of long drawn out intros can be a little bit luxurious and unnecessary for online videos, especially because most people online will not have the patience to sit through it. So that's just something to consider. Now, putting these text sections on your videos is really important for week 1. What we're going to ask you to do is upload a video introduction of yourselves, and what we want you to do is add text containing your full name and your affiliations, etc. on screen, so you don't need to say it. And then all you need to say is your first name and your main field or your interest. What we really want to know, really what's interesting about you. I mean, I know it's important to say what institution or university you're working with, but with video, you've really got this visual channel in order to communicate that. So that's what we want you to do with week 1. Anyway, this is a wrap up for week 0. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope you've learned a little bit more from this tutorial. Go back, mess with the footage a little bit more, start thinking about your own videos, whatever you'd like to do. I'm just really glad so many people participated and there was such a good response from it. Good luck, and I will see you in week 1.